All right, so we're going to get started shortly. Before I start, again, of course you can get up and do what you need to do, but there's food. If you want to grab some food, do it now, and that way you can be nice and settled when the talk starts. Thank you so much for coming. This event is sponsored by the Women's Center and also really co-facilitated by the Feminist Coalition called FEMCO. So just a quick word about that. FEMCO, the Feminist Coalition, formerly the Students of the Women's Center, they've been actively doing planning, programming, and we have a lot of students that are graduating. So anybody who might be interested in getting involved and helping us to host programs like this, we have officer positions available. Next Thursday, a week from today, February 18th, they'll be screening a film called The Hunting Grounds. It's about sexual assault on college campuses, so very relevant. And again, that's hosted by the Feminist Coalition. So come out next Thursday. There are flyers going around, and I will make sure you get one in your hands, about all the Women's Center events going on this semester. So that being said, I want to introduce our speaker. Dr. Brittany Cooper of Rutgers is an assistant professor of women and gender studies and Africana studies at Rutgers. She's a Black feminist theorist who specializes in the study of Black women's intellectual history, hip-hop generation feminism, race, gender, and representation in pop culture. And you'll hear a lot of other great things. Dr. Cooper is also a sought-after public speaker and commentator, in addition to a weekly column on race and gender politics at salon.com. Her work and words have appeared at the New York Times, the Washington Post, Cosmo, TV Guide, LA Times, Ebony.com, TheRoot.com, MSNBC's Melissa Harris Perry. I could go on, and I will. All In with Chris Hayes, Disrupt with Karen Finney, Third Rail and Al Jazeera America, among many others. She's also the co-founder of Crunk Feminist Collective, and they have a book coming out next year, look out for that, a popular feminist blog. And in 2013 and 14, she was named to the Root.com's Root 100, an annual list of top Black influencers. So do me a favor, please put your hands together for Dr. Brittany Cooper.
What's up, everybody? How are y'all today? So you'll learn that I'm an odd mix of like the informal and the academic, so don't be off-put. I might also curse a little bit. I hope that does not concern you. Thank you so much, Brandon, for the introduction and taking good care of me today. Thank you to Karen and Wakita, who I had an opportunity to have lunch with alongside Brandon, and to all of the other wonderful faculty and students that I've met. You have made this a really warm visit. And so now I'm going to have to come hang out a little bit more because y'all are like right down the street. So that's awesome. So thank you so much. Today, so I know my talk is titled Rethinking Intersectionality. This work is within that vein, but I've given it a bit of a different title, in part because at the end I want to talk about Beyonce. Okay. So this talk is called Ratchet Black Politics and Disrespectable Black Feminism, and those are terms I want to define. So let us begin. Respectability politics is a term and set of practices under increasing scrutiny in this political moment. Frequently, we hear young 20-somethings declaring that they will not submit to the demands of respectability either in their daily comportment or in their forms of political activism. Instead, they have begun to mount a formidable challenge to civil rights era ideas about how freedom should be won, offering their own set of defiant countermeasures to challenge the sartorial, and by that I mean fashion-based practices, and familial regulatory regimes that adhere in the notion of respectability. But I think we have to have a history lesson about where respectability politics begins. And so I want to give you a definition from Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham's 1993 book, Righteous Discontent, which is where that term comes from. And in it, she says, respectability demanded that every individual in the Black community assume responsibility for behavioral self-regulation and self-improvement along moral, educational, and economic lines. There could be no laxity as far as sexual conduct, cleanliness, temperance, hard work, and politeness were concerned. There could be no transgression of society's norms. From the public spaces of trains and streets to the private spaces of their individual homes, the behavior of Black was perceived of blacks was perceived as ever visible to the white gaze. So that black people were obsessed with how they were perceived by the white public. And this is because the white public was engaged regularly in a campaign of racial terror. So black people made this sort of negotiation where they said, look, if we are upstanding, moral in public, clean cut, well-dressed, well-spoken, well-educated, we can mitigate the impact that racism has upon our lives. Theorized primarily by black church women and black club women, the politics of respectability became the cornerstone of a massive racial uplift project in the face of forms of government of massive forms of government abandonment of racial justice after the unceremonious end of Reconstruction. So after the Civil War, when the federal government was supposed to protect newly freed black people from the machinations of their former white owners, in 1877, the government said, well, you know, we're ready to broker peace with our white Southern brothers, and so this means we're going to withdraw from the South and we'll leave you to fend for yourselves. And so all of a sudden, black folks had a bunch of angry white people who had previously owned them, now being confronted with the fact of their freedom and no protection from the federal government. And in those kind of conditions, the negotiation they made was, we can't control any of that, we can control ourselves, so that's what we're going to do. Today, we are made to believe that if we fastidiously abide by the dictates of respectability, we go to college, we learn to speak good corporate English, we commit no crimes, we raise children in heterosexual, two-parent, married families. Then we can simultaneously combat systematic racial oppression and mitigate the impact of systemic racism on our personal lives. Now, from a 19th century context in which you are a newly freed, formerly enslaved person and the government has abandoned you, this seems completely reasonable. It seems completely unreasonable to think this way about freedom in the 21st century. And it also seems unreasonable to think this way because racism is a wholly unreasonable project. And thinking that the politics of respectability will save us overtly absolves the state of any responsibility to ameliorate racism. We just simply talk about personal responsibility then. These bad things wouldn't happen to you if you would just act right. So let me fast forward 25 years. Since John Singleton's 1991 film, which is older than many of you here, Boys in the Hood, there has been a slow but lasting infusion of the sagging pants aesthetic into urban sartorial or fashion choices. This is just one example of this dynamic. It is the earliest that I can document and think about. And it certainly inspired young people when I was a kid, which is when this movie came out, to begin sagging their pants. Unlike the many, many fashion trends that have come and gone and come again in the 25 years since this film was released, sagging pants have been a mainstay of the fashion choices of young black men and young urban men of color. They have more recently, though, become subject to ticketing and fines in municipalities around the country. Frequently, this local legislation has been introduced by civil rights era African Americans who sit on city councils and declare that they are tired of looking at these young men's behinds. Now, I'm not interested in looking at anybody's ass either. However, one of the things we should think about is, why has this fashion choice persisted for a quarter century unabated? There is no other fashion trend that I can name that has not endured the sort of 10 to 20 year cycle, right? We've seen bell bottom cycle in and out. We've seen 80s fashion cycle back in and back out. We've seen jean sizes cycle in and out. So for a while there were baggy jeans that sagged. Now people have skinny jeans that sag, right? So these young men of color might be telling us something about how the carceral state, and by that I mean the prison industrial complex, which is where this thing about sagging one's pants comes from, because you can't have belts in prison because of potential suicides, all of that, right? So these men are existing in a moment where we see the explosion of the prison industrial complex completely siphon young men of color out of our communities. And so maybe they are indexing for us something about the way that carcerality has shaped their own sense of themselves, right? Not in a pathological sense, maybe even in a sense of defiance. But rather than continuing to think about this as some form of social menace, we should perhaps begin to think about the systems that actually create the narratives in which this is salient and in which it resonates. And this becomes the problem of only thinking about the problem of respectability, is that we can see young men telling us that carcerality has some effect on the way that they think about how they move through the world, and yet we critique them for the problem instead of the prison industrial complex, which they didn't create, right? So whatever your personal view of how high on the way someone chooses to wear his or her pants, I think we can all agree that sagging pants will not determine one's access to a college education, and it will have little bearing on achieving a positive outcome if one should encounter the police. More to the point, even if it did have a bearing on these outcomes, it should not. We do not know then what to do with the image of a protester with his hands up and his sagging pants. And the move among many is to discredit these forms of protest because they are, quote unquote, not respectable. Part of the problem, though, so part of what I'm saying is we don't associate men in communities who would wear face masks and sag their pants as people who are being politicized, right? As people with a sort of radical political consciousness. And even if they cannot fully articulate it, a sense that injustice has happened and that they should put their bodies on the line to protest it, which is what we see this young man doing and this group of young men. So part of the problem is that we have equated and unfairly conflated civil rights protest with respectability politics. And that's not fair to either generation, because many students in the civil rights generation took time off from college to get in the streets to fight against segregation. And that wasn't considered a respectable thing to do. At the same time, we labor under the assumption that rage is not a reasonable response to systematic and continuing trauma, mistreatment, and injustice. And I read this in part as a rhetoric of rage because this young man didn't put on a suit and tie and come out with his hands up. He is being defiant at every level. He is saying, I'm going to wear the thing that makes you think that I'm not worthy of life, and I'm still going to throw my hands up in protest. That is a really different kind of performance of radical politics in this moment, and we have to grapple with what it means that it doesn't happen according to the grammar of respectability that we are taught to hear and receive. So part of what I'm trying to talk about today is how respectability plays out in various aspects of culture, and how this particular pop culture moment and political moment is asking us to consider the political and radical possibilities of the ratchet and the disrespectable. But before I tell you what I mean by those terms, I want to briefly demonstrate what an unquestioned investment in respectability looks like. Though rumors and speculations about Bill Cosby's propensity for sexual assault have lingered for more than 2 decades, in October 2014, when a comedian named Hannibal Buress ripped Cosby in a comedic bit for his well-known, if largely unacknowledged, history of raping women, a slew of women began coming forward. More than 50 women to date have publicly accused Cosby of drugging them only, or drugging them and then sexually assaulting them. And he is now being tried in Pennsylvania for a 2004 assault against Andrea Constand. The numbers of accusers alone are enough to give us pause. That some of the accusations go back to as early as 1966, 50 years ago, matters even more. And I want to be clear. I'm a child of the Cosby generation. I grew up watching the Cosby Show every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central Time with my mama, right? I am 1 year younger than Rudy Huxtable. So the Cosby Show is a significant part of my childhood. And well into the 2000s, I would watch this show on reruns at night as the way to decompress, because it's simply good television. But in a piece that I wrote at Salon, where I formerly had a column, I said, since 2004, in Bill Cosby's infamous pound cake speech at Howard University, he has gone around the country lecturing to poor black people about our failure to uphold our end of the bargain. A Faustian bargain, if ever there was one, the idea that being respectable citizens with quote-unquote good families would pave the path to freedom has proved to be simply untrue. Meanwhile, while Cosby was preaching to us, he has lived a lie. He has asked us to invest not only in the lie of his own life, but in the larger lies of black respectability and patriarchy. His own crimes demonstrate in black and white the diseased, misogynistic, violent thinking at the heart of patriarchy. And as much as I might love The Cosby Show, we should perhaps consider it fruit of the poisonous tree. Meaning, I don't watch it anymore. A beloved thing from childhood, I don't watch it anymore. I'm arguing that we ought to perhaps slay our iconic black patriarch and matriarch and make some room for some new ideas about what black life and black family can be in the 21st century. And I recognize that the claim and demand to slay the image of The Cosby Show might be a kind of violent proposition. And given, like, when I first said this, one of my friends, in defiance of what I had said, dressed as Claire Huxtable for Halloween. They were like, we're not giving it. This is part of our childhood. He was like my daddy. He was not like my daddy. My daddy was nothing like him, which is not a good thing. But in real life or otherwise, my daddy was not like Bill Cosby. So I recognize that it feels extreme. But while we were watching The Cosby Show in the 80s and 90s, the man at the center of it, the man for whom it is named, allegedly victimized and terrorized more than a dozen women in that time period, plus the dozens before that time period. That has to matter. And it cannot matter simply in terms of criminal justice. It's a question about where our emotional and affective and representational investments lie. So in short, my argument is that there is a material cost to our investment in respectability politics. We're so invested in the image that Bill Cosby projected. I mean, we essentially associated him one-to-one with Cliff Huxtable. And he really built a whole brand off of our conflation of the two. So our investment in respectability politics and in heteronormative notions of family and in notions of black excellence and exceptionalism actually cost communities something, actually cost women something, right? Both white women and women of color. Our love for The Cosby Show harkens back to the political project of respectability, namely to show that African Americans are fully capable of being normal, nuclear, and heteronormative. And by heteronormative, I mean you have families headed by straight two parents, right? And a belief that this is the only normal, healthy way to raise a family. In many ways, the runaway success of The Cosby Show marks the cultural apex of the project of black respectability. But we have to measure that narrative against the fact that in the very same moment that we were reveling in having Claire Huxtable in the cultural sphere, so many Claire Huxtables, among them Anita Hill and Lani Guinier, and these women are before many of your time, but they were the epitome of respectable African American womanhood. And they were experiencing not the Claire Huxtable narrative, but finding out that this was no country for black women. Like Anita Hill, the woman who accused current Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment, the women who came forward against Cosby had been accused, like Anita Hill, of trying to take down a good black man. Now, I fully believe that our current Supreme Court Justice sexually harassed Anita Hill, but black folks said to her in that moment, why are you trying to take down the black man? And you see what happened? He got on the Supreme Court and he has presided over the dismantling with his swing vote of every major piece of civil rights legislation that we secured in the 1960s. There is a material cost to not believing women. So I would submit that it is Cosby and not the women who have disrespected the legacy of all those black men who were lynched. Because some said, you know, white women have always been accusing black men of stuff, right? And this is why we shouldn't believe these white women. But it's Cosby who disrespected all those black men who were lynched for crimes they didn't commit, not the victims that he actually victimized. He actively played into the stereotype and myth of the black male rapist, and his heinous, sexist, misogynist acts cannot be dismissed because of them. So what then do we make possible when we declare death to the project of respectability? And to be clear, if we cannot believe in the genius behind the Cosby Show, and I'm arguing that we can't, because to continue to believe in the Cosby Show is to conflate Bill Cosby with Cliff Huxtable, right? And so once you, I don't know anybody that can honestly laugh at that show and think about the fact that the man we're watching raped 50 women. If you really believe them, you can't do it. Just like I can't go to an R. Kelly concert because I believe that he harms little girls, and I believe he married Aaliyah when she was 15 and he was 27. So I just cannot hear him sing Seems Like You're Ready, because it sounds like a pedophile trolling song to me, right? So if we can't believe in the genius behind the Cosby Show, then the black cultural project of respectability is most certainly dead. And then if it is dead, then where do we go? Perhaps towards ratchetness. But first things first, what do I mean when I say ratchet? Well, ratchetness refers to a range of African American working class practices that exceed the bounds of respectability and propriety. And they find their articulation in excess, in being extra, in doing the most, in stretching notions of propriety until they snap or break, and then reveling in snapping off and breaking you off and breaking it down, and all of the kinds of cultural practices that these moments signify and allow for. Now, I claim to be endemic to the ratchet and indigenous to the ratchet, because the first iteration of ratchetness occurred in my hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana in 1999. See, a good scholar knows even the genealogy of ratchetness. And it was in a song from a rapper called Anthony Mandigo, and he had a song called Do the Ratchet. In 2004, Lil Boosie re-released that song it was the same song though, called Do the Ratchet, and it was a dance. Now, in that moment, note that the ratchet was not merely a categorization, it was an action, it was a way of performing. These days, in popular parlance, people use ratchetness interchangeably with the ways in which ghetto used to be used pejoratively. But I would argue that ratchetness is, as one of my little cousins explained to me years ago, ghetto on steroids. Ratchetness is ghetto practices all the way turned up. And she said this to me because she was like, I was in the club and a girl was in the club and all she had on was some pantyhose, and that was her whole outfit. And I was like, now what? Okay, so this was her cultural marker to me. We're in Shreveport having a conversation about what ratchetness is. So ratchetness marks a different kind of boundary. And whereas many of us have some connection to the ghetto or the projects as a kind of physical locale, it bears noting that everybody in the projects is not ratchet. Ratchet is a kind of hustling sensibility, in that it is both hardworking in its pursuit of resources and pleasure. It has a kind of don't give a fuckness about it that is a bit different from being ghetto, in the sense that ghetto-ness has a self-conscious sense of itself and its own alterity. Ratchetness is unapologetically, unself-consciously different, though, and it figures problems not as a problem of the ratchet, but as a problem of the power structure. So I want to show you my absolute most favorite moment of ratchet behavior ever in life. Okay. Oh, no. Oh, wait. Okay. I don't know why Amber Rose is there. We'll loop back to her. Okay. So I just want to play a little bit of this. Let me see. Hopefully I have volumes. Yes. Okay. Okay, I want to give you a little bit of his prelude. Okay. Okay, hold on. I'm going to just start you at the beginning. Okay.
How's that self at? and I thought about one of the most beautiful women in the world today, and I said, Halle Berry. You know, a lot of women look at her and they say, I want to be beautiful like Halle Berry. But, you know, we got a lot of different types of women, different colors, shapes, and sizes. I just wanted to let them know that it didn't matter what you look like. If you feel like you're Halle Berry and you got your confidence that high, that's what it is. You're Halle Berry. Let me give them a little sample of it.
Yes.
A lot of the youngsters gonna already know about it.
Oh no, what happened? Okay, I could go on, but I will stop because this really speaks to a deep place in me. But look, this is a local rapper named Hurricane Chris, and this is literally the Louisiana House of Representatives. And so the woman in the blue suit is Representative Barbara Norton, and she was like, this is a positive young man in the community, and we need to bring him down here and give him like one of these house commemorations. So he puts on a suit and tie, and Representative Norton invites him into the House chamber, and what does he perform? Halle Berry, Halle Berry, which is the most awesome form of ratchetness I've ever seen in life. Because of course, so, you see like state representatives in a different version of this video, they're bobbing their heads, but then there's like a huge shitstorm after the fact, because they're like, this was disrespectful, we cannot believe. So at some point they realize that like they're being kind of played a little bit. But what I love, right, is that the song itself is about ratchetness, but the grounds upon which this particular performance occurs fully encapsulates all that is ratchet about ratchetness. It's alterity, it's impropriety, it's loudness, it's defiance, it's obliviousness, because he's like there, like he gives them a preamble like, no, because this is about confidence, and I feel like if you're confident, then you too can be Halle Berry. Like he's really saying this to these state representatives, right? It's Southern working classness, its capacity to inspire both joy and guilty pleasure, its internal respectability, cringing, and this outright backlash, right? So what I love too is that he takes it into the halls of state power. And this is one of the ways that ratchetness might actually show up and black alterity might actually show up in a place where the state makes policies that shape black life in the state that incarcerates more black people per capita than anywhere on the globe. And Hurricane Chris is from the city that sends more black men to death row than any other place in the country. So then I want to shift to thinking about the gender dimensions of ratchetness. That's why Amber Rose was here. So let me go back one. So why is Amber Rose showing her very fine body on IG ratchet? Instagram for you old people like me. But Kanye West doing the absolute most and jumping on stage at multiple award shows is not framed as ratchet. Why is Amber Rose, as she recently did, calling out Kanye West's predilection for analingus ratchet? But Kanye shaming Amber for being a stripper when his wife became famous for being in a sex tape, not ratchet. Well, part of this is about our genealogies of ratchetness and our genealogies of twerking. And I'm doing this in a Louisiana context because I'm working up to this Beyonce video, but also because these terms that we keep using have a specific historical and local context. It just happens to be the place where I grew up, which makes my life so much fun, but it's true, right? So I want to get at this gendering of the ratchet, right? By way of thinking about twerking, which is a ratchet practice that literally comes from the same state. I'm just going to do a little bit. I promise. Okay. So when we think of twerking, depending on who you are, you either think of that terrible wreck of things that Miley Cyrus made in August 2013 when she was non-twerking on stage but thought she was twerking. She does not have the accoutrements to twerk, so it didn't work out. Or you think about the twerk team or various black girls on YouTube making twerk videos, or maybe you think about Juicy J's twerk scholarship. You might think about lots of things. But I grew up watching men twerk 20 years ago. Because twerking wasn't just created in 2013 when Miley Cyrus non-twerked on stage. It's actually been a term and a concept that has existed for a couple decades. But you know how things exist in local places and then they make national news and then folks are like, this shit is new. And all of us were like, no, it's not. No, it's not. In fact, it's old. It's old, right? So I want to show you a little bit of what I'm talking about.
Shake it like a dog, shake it like a dog. Shake it like a dog, shake it like a dog. Shake it like a dog, shake it like a dog. Shake it, shake it, shake it, kick it. Shake it like a dog, shake it like a dog. Shake it like a dog, shake it like a dog. Shake it like a dog, shake it like a dog. Shake it like a dog, shake it like a dog. Stop now, diggity bound, pause. You want to turn the fella step back. Where the virgins at? Where the virgins at? All y'all put your hands in the air. Where the virgins at?
Ratchetness. Okay. This is DJ Jubilee. And DJ Jubilee is a local artist from New Orleans who made all of these dance tracks in the late 1980s and 1990s. So if you went to a party in Louisiana in the 1990s, you spent your time before the party learning all these dances, because for 15 minutes increments, people were going to play DJ Jubilee songs and you had to know all the dances or you were whack. Well, and so in 1993, what he was talking about is twerk something, right? So he keeps using the term twerk throughout the song. I just want to show it to people because we have evidence that over 20 years ago, black people in the Deep South were talking about twerking. But beyond that, DJ Jubilee is a straight man. So today we tend to associate men in twerk cultures with queerness, which is absolutely fine. But one of the questions that we should be thinking about is why we see twerking now as a commentary on your masculinity and sexuality in a way that wasn't true 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, when men twerked, particularly when putatively heterosexual men twerked, the view was that it was evidence of their sexual virility. That if you knew how to move your hips, then you knew how to do other things too. So, y'all catch that. Okay. So we've seen a sort of narrowing and a repositioning of twerk culture and ratchet practices as being gendered female. But part of this is about the legibility of black female bodies in this moment as excessive and inflected through stripper culture. The reason I always insist when I give these kinds of talks on returning to local genealogies is because we are reminded that there is far more gender fluidity, especially when we understand this in the broader context of social phenomena like gentrification, the shrinking of the middle class, and what we might call a neoliberal sharp right turn into austerity. All of these practices shift our rootedness to place, making citation practices both all the more urgent and all the more difficult. And I'm giving this to you because when we get to Beyonce, there's a reason why this video and basically her repositioning herself as ratchet is set in New Orleans. Because the grammar of what she does there is forged in New Orleans, right? So makes sense only in this Gulf South context in which people dance this way and move through the world with this kind of critique of the state, right? So she is part of that culture, and it makes legible that certain kinds of things are allowed. So many of us who are from this region, even though you see me and you don't see Ratchet, part of the reason that I like, but on the inside though, I really am though, right, is because it allows me to make sense and make legible certain parts of my identity that are about working class identity, but also about the kind of cultural resources for resistance that I have. So that I let people know often, I ain't had a PhD that long. I promise I haven't. And so don't come the wrong way on the wrong day, because it might not go well, because that Ratchet thing is just under the surface, right? So Ratchet practices like twerk turn our attention to the body, and more specifically to the booty, proclaiming, as Janelle Monáe and Erykah Badu have, the booty don't lie. But the circulation of images via the digital, along with the rise of strip club culture and hip hop, have profoundly refigured and regendered local cultural iterations of these practices, attaching them to the Black female body. And so the question becomes, if the booty don't lie, right, if ratchetness and twerk are really part of a kind of local, politically resistive truth-telling, then what kinds of truths do Black women's bodies tell? Are those truths capable of marking an archive not only of pain and exploitation, but also of pleasure? And how does the Black female body get refigured in digital spaces, and do memories and histories and pasts and futures that adhere to our bodies travel well into digital space? I would say that Black female bodies don't travel smoothly in digital space, so even though Amber Rose is, the way she articulates race is interesting, you know, her ability to move and be legible in digital space is not a smooth kind of movement, not in the same way that Kim Kardashian's is, right? But I would say that the little bit of Ratchet that we all have in us is able to anticipate that, and it is able to refigure ratchetness as a kind of resistance strategy born out of what other feminists like Cecily Bowen have called hood feminism, and which my crew calls crunk feminism. Ratchetness then has become a kind of conduit for us. Oh, I want to show you this one picture then of another way that we can think about what Black women's bodies embracing the Ratchet looks like. So we might think about these women who in 2015 went out in the streets as members of the Blackout Collective in San Francisco to protest the police killing of Black women and girls, and to protest state violence against Black women and girls. Now, in respectability discourse of the type I read to you at the beginning of the talk, Black women would never show up topless anywhere in the public. Respectability is all about hiding your body, saying I'm not sexual, not showing anyone your intimate parts. This is completely anti-respectable. Right? It is a complete disavowal of respectability as a strategy for change. Instead, it is an embrace of we're mad, we're angry, we're also women and vulnerable, and we're going to show you the things that we understand to make us women, which is our breast. We're going to show this, and we're going to do this in solidarity with other women who are being killed. So I call this just a kind of ratchet radicalism, right? It's no less invested in changing the conditions of Black folks' lives, but it says that the kind of respectability policing of the body is not the way to get there. So ratchetness has become a kind of conduit for us to mark a path out of the strictures of respectability into a path of new possibility. And that path is marked by what I call at the CFC a kind of disrespectability politics, which is both about the endless ways in which Black women's bodies are disrespected, but also about the ways in which we have come to disavow, disregard, and discard respectability politics among next generation Black feminists, precisely because it does not provide us with the requisite social protections that it seems to promise. And it forecloses other expressions of Black female selfhoods in politics. So this is one example of how walking away from respectability politics might allow us to put our bodies on the line in a different way. And then on the other hand, we might talk about the other kinds of cultural politics and formations and ways Black women can put their bodies on the line. And the way I want to talk about that is through Beyonce's formation. So I began the talk by using the term disrespectability politics, and I originally theorized that term 4 years ago in relationship to Beyonce. I theorized it in a post at the Crunk Feminist Collective right after Blue Ivy was born about Beyonce and Jay. And about it in that moment I wrote, disrespectability politics is the potential in the space between the dis and the respect. The potential and the danger of what it means to discard respectability altogether. This space between the disses we get and the respect we seek is the space in which Black women live our lives. It is the crunk place, the percussive place, the place that makes noise and music, the place that moves us, the place that offers possibility in the midst of two impossible extremes. And this was happening in a moment when Blue Ivy had been born, and there was all of this commentary about how the baby would look, because folks were like, Beyonce's real pretty and Jay-Z's not attractive, and he's got very traditionally Black features, big lips, big nose, and we don't want the baby to have any of that, and we also hope she doesn't have nappy hair. And then in the first couple of years of Blue Ivy's life, people policed her hair, because sometimes, her mom would let her come out with her hair just kind of however she woke up like this. And so she would just be out in the streets that way. Black people have a thing about not sending Black girls out the house with their hair unkempt. Nobody combs your hair. Like, do you belong to anyone? Does anyone love you? Like, it's a thing, right? So 4 years later, Beyonce chose to revisit this moment in this way. That's Blue Ivy. And she's basically saying to all the folks who had something to say in 2012, in the song she replies, I like my baby hair with baby hair and afros. And then you have Blue with all of this Black girl confidence just billowing out of the screen. It is a perfect moment. But also, people not going to be able to do nothing with Blue because she already knows she awesome. Which is great, right? Which is great. And I wonder how many 4-year-old Black girls get to know that so early, right? But in this regard, B's latest video really fully articulates what is possible in the no fucks to give place constituted by politics of disrespectability. She occupies in this video and song exactly the space between the dis and the respect, such that at the beginning of the video, she's responding to haters who dare to associate her with the fictive occultic Illuminati, right? She says, all y'all corny with that Illuminati mess, right? So she's just responding to the stuff that people say to her. She's in active dialogue with her audience. And by the end, we see her sinking a New Orleans police cruiser in the middle of floodwaters meant to conjure a post-Hurricane Katrina New Orleans. This video also, or the video for the song, highlights ratchet figures like Messy Maya and twerk stars like Big Frida. As a Louisiana girl, this moment makes me proud because so much of our capacity to think in non-binary ways about cultural politics and political possibility is actually rooted in cultural work that comes out of Louisiana in general and New Orleans in particular. So Beyonce offers us a new formulation of ratchet possibility, one that is unapologetically Black, unapologetically Southern, one that, as hip-hop feminist Joan Morgan might say, fucks with the grays. Now, folks have been very clear to point out what she doesn't get right in this video. We could talk about it. All I've been doing is talking about that for the last 5 days. But the point of ratchetness is in some ways about a repudiation of rightness. It may be concerned with being real and even with being righteous, but it is wholly unconcerned with propriety or with doing things the right way. And it is also unapologetically rooted in the critical and creative and corporeal labor of Black women who put their bodies on the literal line, who make plans and get information to choreograph Black freedom. The place that these women, the women who have helped us to create the Black Lives Matter movement for us, cannot be gotten to in a respectable manner. So you just see B throwing up 2 FU signs in the middle of the video and holding them there, right? It is a literal FU to respectability. She's done a quick version of this in like the Flawless video, but this frame just freezes for several seconds, right? So whether it's a black boy named Hurricane who steps into the Louisiana House of Representatives to tell them to twerk something, or a black girl using the context of a hurricane and twerking to say, F the New Orleans police in particular and the U.S. state in general, they are both invoking the radical political possibilities of a contemporary U.S. Gulf South sensibility and identity to say fuck you. In joy and in pleasure, in pain and in politics, we're trying to get free. Thank you.
Can we give one more round of applause for that? As a radical feminist myself, the highest compliment I can give is rad, and that was rad. We're going to open up the floor for Q&A. We'd really appreciate to hear from students, but anybody who has questions, so we'll take student questions first, but we'll get to everybody as many as possible. If you're going to sneak out, again, for anybody who came late, we have surveys all around, and we really need you to fill out the surveys before you go. It'll take a few seconds, and that'll help us make the case that we can do more of this kind of program, and we're already kind of planting seeds to get Dr. Cooper to come back again. But we have lots of programs next Thursday. The Hunting Grounds, the Feminist Coalition is going to be screening the Hunting Grounds about sexual assault on college campuses. So lots of great events happening this semester. Also, if you're here for a professor, there's a sign-in sheet on the back table. But now, with no further ado, we'll open up the floor. Maybe you can just say your name and speak really loud, and if I can reach you, I'll bring the microphone to you. Preferably, we'd like you to speak in the microphone, so for the podcast it'll work. But anybody, any questions? Anything at all? It's like the food, don't be shy. Yeah, shoot. You want to come up here a little bit?
Hi, Dr. Cooper.
Hi.
Great speech, very engaging. My question was, can it be perceived that ratchetness, at least in modern American society, can be perceived as somewhat satirical?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is, so we would in contemporary parlance say that folks are dragging people, right? That they're using irony and they're playing on and making fun of the racist assumptions of white folks. And they're making light of them and they're making fun of them, absolutely. And that even, you know, the view that those who are sort of twerking and being ratchet are unintelligent, playing that up and highlighting that is a kind of ruse sometimes, right? That, you know, it's a purposeful misdirection. Yeah, I think so.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Answered it.
Thank you. What was your name?
Kyle.
Kyle, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Other questions? That's a great question. We touched on a lot today, too. A lot from pop culture there that might have related.
Is there any particular Black artist would you like to see to also represent the, you know, just like Beyonce?
I want Kendrick to get clearer. I think that he's been given credit for being very political because of To Pimp a Butterfly, particularly the Black Feather Berry. But I think that he is actually very conflicted because for him, he says, look, you know, I see folks in my own community doing the killing, and so how can we talk to the police when we're killing each other? Whereas Black Lives Matter has said really clearly, we have a long history of Black people in Black communities calling out the problem of interracial violence, and that has nothing to do with whether we can call out the state for also doing acts of violence to us because they're held to a higher standard, because they have the legal ability to use lethal force, right? And so like when Black people commit crimes against each other, we go to jail in very large numbers, but cops kill us and don't. And so when Kendrick says things like that, that conflict, he's far less clear than Beyonce, even though he's considered far more woke or whatever than Beyonce. And so he's an artist that I'm following because I like Kendrick, I like him a lot, and he's going to be really on fire when he gets clear about what the stakes are.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you speak to the white appropriation of ratchetness?
Yeah, white people be doing stuff. I mean, look, folks, you know, it's all well and good, right? When it just looks like it's licensed to sort of say anything that you want. Part of the thing that I've been trying to say is that ratchetness is a real kind of survival and resistance strategy for people who typically are marginalized, or not seen as intelligent, don't always have a lot of access, or come from communities where that's been their story. And so it gives you a little bit of moxie and confidence to remember that everything about you is not wrong, and to not accept the kind of broader cultural supremacist narrative about yourself. And so I wrote this piece about Iggy Azalea when she was the hotness, about, you know, how bothered I was that she was trying to appropriate not just a black sound, but really a black girl kind of sonic southern thing, because that accent she has is a black woman in Atlanta, in the deep south kind of accent. It's very particular, right? It's not kind of just a universal black accent. So she appropriated a really particular thing, and those women have not had a lot of success in hip hop. And so I was like, so why are you happy with this kind of swagger and sonic, you know, sonic kind of performance from a white woman, but you won't give the black girls who sound exactly like her with more talent than her a shot, right? And so this is the problem with appropriation. It's not about whether there's lots of exchange within musical cultures, because there is. It is about the ways that, one, white people take things and don't cite, so it's not citational. So it's never about an homage. It's really just like, hey, I occupy this space. I don't have to give any credit where credit is due for how I got this. But two, that white folks can benefit from doing this art when black people are actively being suppressed from doing it, right? So that three, what happens is that when we tell the histories of the moment, then it's like the way we tell the history of rock and roll. And we don't talk about black progenitors of rock and roll, like Little Richard, like Etta James, right? All these folks who are sort of involved in rap music, in rock music. So the thing I worry about is we don't, like, it is conceivable that 20 years from now, we could tell this moment as a history of Macklemore, right? Because he won the Grammy. He's had more commercial success than even Kendrick has. And so if we're not careful, we could tell it as a moment about Eminem, right? If we're not careful, because remember that from the vantage point of the 50s, black people didn't think that the story of rock music would be told the way it's told today. The story of jazz, the way that it's told today, the story of blues, country, every American musical form is largely not told with its black progenitors in mind. And so there's no reason to believe that hip hop cannot be told in the same way.
Oh.
And then we'll come back there. And then we'll come up here. That's how far it goes.
Okay, I'll say that then. I'd like to know, hi, my name is Marian.
Hi.
I'd like to know what your opinion is on boycotting the Oscars, like Jada Pinkett Smith and Spike Lee.
Yeah, I don't really have an opinion about it. I mean, I think that the Oscars are egregious from the bottom to the top. And what I mean by that is, whether you're talking about the nearly all-white judges that they have, or the fact that, for instance, they invited the writers of Straight Outta Compton, but not any of the actors, and the writers were white. So the only black film that got any love was Straight Outta Compton's white writers, right? Like, this kind of thing is a thing we should reject, and it should be called out and highlighted. I think boycotting matters. I think that there are protests that matter. I just think that that's complicated, and the boycott conversation is really a conversation about whether black people should want Oscars at all. Whether, people are like, well, why are you relying on this structure to validate what we do? Why can't we have internal structures to validate what we do? Because we're better not just than ourselves, but white people too, in certain instances, I mean, I have plenty of white actors and actresses that I love. Meryl Streep is the baddest, right? She's also been out talking slightly crazy about race here in the last day or so. I saw some flood across my timeline, so I don't know, right? But the point is that the pinnacle of success in America is not just being better than folks who look like you, but being the best among everyone. And so I understand folks saying we don't want our contributions as good as they are to be ghettoized, and that's not about devaluing black art. It's just about saying that we're good enough to compete with anybody if given a shot, and what we want is a shot. So I think that whatever methods and means we can have to make that come about is fine. I think it was harder for Jada because people weren't that hot on Will's accent in Concussion, and the way that, you know, we can think about what it means for American black actors to do these terrible accents of diasporic black folk, right, when they're really good diasporic actors that can play those roles. By contrast, we can think about what happens when diasporic black folks are asked to play all the roles in 12 Years a Slave, right, which is a decidedly African-American experience in some respects. So that's a complicated sort of inter-community competition too. So I didn't know. I mean, the point though, really, is I was like, but who really watches the Oscars from beginning to end? Because it's long and shit, and basically, it's always been white. And so I would only really watch when black people were up for stuff. I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna watch the best actor to see if we won. But I'm not gonna watch 3.5 hours of like celebrations of obscure white people in movies. I'm not gonna do it. And that's just my own little form of black resistance. So, you know, so I think that part of the reason it didn't catch on is because a lot of black folks were like, but we weren't gonna watch anyway. And we only watch when one of us is up for something anyway. And that's so rare that like, this ain't a big thing that you taking from us, so whatever, right? And so I think that's kind of why it fell, more so than people's belief that things should change.
You want to come up so we can? It's about as far as we can go, right? That's good.
Okay. Like in a time where artists like who rely heavily on producers like Future and Young Thug, do you think the fact that people legitimately think those people are good speaks to like when you get a lyricist like Kendrick and J. Cole, do you think that boosts them up because other people are so bad?
No, I think that Kendrick and J. Cole are legitimately good.
Yeah, but like in another time, do you think that they would be just another rapper, like in the 90s?
No, I mean, I think that, you know, I used to ask this question about Jay-Z in the aftermath of Tupac and Biggie, right? But I think the difference in now in the 90s is that in the 90s, you just had more diversity, period. So you had lots of different kind of rap sounds existing at the exact same time. So folks didn't think about rap music as being a paucity of things. You had Diggable Planets and you had Snoop.
And you had PM Dawn,
yeah.
And then you had, you know,
yeah, so
Space River.
Literally, it's a different media moment altogether. So I think that what you would have is diversity. I think the point is that maybe what we wouldn't be doing is listening to Young Thug and Future. I think we would probably be listening to Kendrick and J. Cole. Yeah. But I also think like that rap has also been
It's evolved.
I'm sorry?
It's evolved.
Absolutely.
In the wrong direction for me.
I wouldn't say that, right? I don't think you can say that. I think that
people are rip-offs of each other.
I think it's a 40-year tradition. I think that, and I'm working on a long-form piece about this right now. This is not about the lack of creativity among rappers. This is about the fact that up until the last sort of few years where people could kind of distribute their own product online, that the deregulation of media in the 1990s, so a thing actually happened, right? In 1996, in the Clinton presidency, he didn't just deregulate banks, he didn't just deregulate or change welfare policy, he also deregulated media conglomerates. And part of what that meant was that these media companies now could buy up large shares of urban radio, and that's what they did. And when they did that, it meant that they just then imposed top 40 playlists on urban stations, local stations. It used to be that local rap cultures, the way you got put on, the reason why you don't know DJ Jubilee and I do is because before 1996, I I heard him on the local radio, right? And you wouldn't have heard him in New Jersey because you were in a different media market. Now, we wouldn't know anything about him because he wouldn't even be able to get played on local radio because local radio is controlled by big corporate entities. So what that led to at the level of policy was an actual narrowing of the kinds of artists that could be put on and could actually build careers. And the only thing that has kind of mediated that is the creation of YouTube. And so then artists have used YouTube and online platforms to distribute music, but part of the challenge has been, how do they get paid for it? So I know that folks like me to come places and tout a narrative about the decline of hip hop, but I think that it's a really, really narrow and uninformed narrative. And part of the reason for that is because I also think that people mark the decline of hip hop by thinking about men and not women. Right? So okay, so I see that you're irritated, so let me just...
I'm not irritated, I'm just confused.
So what I mean by that is that if we want to think about what's happening in hip hop, part of what I'm telling you is that the things that you think of as decline are not about problems in the culture, it's about problems in the structure. So I'm saying to you that the reason that you hear crappy rap is not because only crappy people are making music, it's because those are the only people that can get played on the radio. Right?
I agree with that.
And so that's not about a decline in the culture. The culture is still very vibrant. So if you want to hear...
That's why I see so many unknown rappers who are fantastic, and a lot of people who sound the same that get on the radio.
Exactly. So that's not a decline in the culture, that's a decline in the structure, right?
That's why I'm saying like Kendrick and J. Cole are people that are seen as these, I agree, they're really talented rappers and artists, but they're like put on a pedestal because other artists that get on the radio are so much worse than them.
Yeah, I think part of what I'm telling you is that you want me to sort of engage in a counter history that I can't actually prove. So I'm also a scholar of this, so I'm teaching a class right now where my students and I begin in 1979. We listen to the first recordings of rap music ever made. We trace it every decade and every major artist, and I'm telling you that even doing that over the course of a semester, I still think Kendrick and J. Cole would stand up. I don't think that they would be too alone. I think you're right that there are other artists who are comparable to them who are not getting put on. And here's why I like Kendrick. The reason why I think Kendrick is as good as he is because his level of, the amount of literacies in his albums is absurd. So at any given moment...
That's a good thing.
Yeah, at any given moment, you don't know if you're listening to somebody who's trying to conjure Andre 3000, somebody who's conjuring Biggie storytelling, somebody who's conjuring NWA, right, and the sounds of the West Coast in the 80s. So he's both playing with that. So he cites, so all of those people, you can visibly hear the influences, and then he still sort of ratchets it up a notch. And the ability to put all of those things on one album together, all those regional influences, all those stylistic influences, that's good, that's genius work. That's not, so even rap artists who are great lyricists typically don't have that good regional blend, they don't have that level of stylistic diversity, and they certainly don't have that interesting kind of content. So that's why I'm giving it to Kendrick. J. Cole is a different conversation, right? So I'm trying to say that the assessments I'm making are rooted in actual standards about the music and not just about the culture and the structure as well. But also this point about women is really important, and it is that if we are mapping decline, the fact that Nicki Minaj is the primary artist that you know, I love Nicki. I think she's bad. But I grew up listening to Lauryn Hill, the Brad Queen, Latifah, MC Lyte, Kim, Lil' Kim, Foxy Brown, all in the same moment, right? And so the fact that I cannot rattle off for you female MCs with the same level of albums, that's where the decline has really happened. And you watch those women and they're moving in other genres. They're on TV, they're producing, they're making television shows, they're publishing books. They're doing other kinds of things, which is an interesting narrative. So I think of decline really differently because I'm like, where are the women, right? The dudes are typically all right.
Hi there, I'm Lani. I wanted to ask you what you thought about McElroy with white privilege and white privilege too. I just wanted your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I'm sort of not here for Macklemore's bellyaching. Like, I appreciate that he has a critique of white privilege. I think he owes that to the culture. I'm not ever impressed with, the sort of like, listen to me while I rap for 9 minutes about my white privilege. Like, I think it's a good intervention. I think it's a good teaching tool. I've only listened to part of it. I've listened to the responses to it more. Like I've listened to other MCs responding to it and then sort of the interviews that he's doing about it. I'm glad, I think he gets a lot of shine because he's willing to actually talk about it, and I think that that's a good thing. But anytime a white person is sort of having a conversation about white privilege, like that's to talk to white people. Like we already know that you have white privilege. Thanks for that. Glad you're acknowledging it. Hope it helps your folks. Like that's kind of my assessment. Yeah.
There was a gentleman back there who had a hand first. Do you have a question?
Oh yeah. Well, I have a few questions.
One at a time.
Okay. So about the Oscars thing.
Yeah.
I personally, I'm Dan, by the way.
Okay.
I think that I don't think that one should protest the Oscars because of mostly white people are in it, and it's always been white people. I think it should be protested because what it stands for is the whole, how media controls it. Everything's about movies and how much money they make compared to everyone else, like white or not, white, black, whatever. Yeah.
No, I hear you. I think the point is though that anytime
I personally don't watch the Oscars.
I mean, they're 3.5 hours long. It's ridiculous, but I think that we actually should always speak out against institutional racism in all its guises, and that we're not making mutually exclusive points. So there may be a problem with the way that the Oscars shape media cultures more generally, but there's also a problem with any kind of active exclusion of black people, right? And the thing is, we put the Oscars on notice last year when they snubbed Selma. Ava DuVernay's film. We told them, like, these judgments you're making are a problem. This film is magnificent. What are you doing? And so then they came back this year, like, this year we're not going to give y'all any either. We're not going to do it. And so, look, that's not to be divorced from the politics of this moment in which Trumpism prevails, right? Like, there is a way that sometimes we don't see white acts of racist aggression because they happen behind closed doors and they come out and we just have a decision and we don't know how people arrived at that decision, and they tell us, well, I evaluated things based on merits. So how, it wasn't about race, your stuff just wasn't good, right? But there's a way that a merit argument always benefits white people. So if your look, I would concede your definition of merit, but if we're looking at the impact of your determinations of merit, if I don't work from the assumption that black folks just put out inherently inferior art, then what I must conclude is that if your meritorious determinations year after year continue to be all white, then they may be meritorious, but your notions of merit are fundamentally racist. So you can have your merit and I'll have my race. Like you don't get to pick. And that becomes the challenge, is that we have to be able to say that what white people call merit is often fundamentally rooted in racist notions. And that is very hard because many white people think that merit is race neutral. I mean, Matt Damon said on Project Greenlight, we don't diversify in the making of the film. We diversify in the film itself. So anybody can make a film about black people. We just have to put black people in the movies, but the decision makers can be all white. That's not a problem. He said that. He was like, because we don't want to make this about race. We want to do this on merit alone. And so every time an argument about merit gets deployed that way, it is always as justification for being like, we had to choose all white people because they were just better. And so that's the thing we're protesting, right? And what you're talking about is sort of another kind of point, which I think is potentially legit. It's just that representation really matters. And so for instance, so you know how I talked about Cosby in my talk? Growing up seeing a black family on television where the mother was a lawyer and the dad was a doctor, like I know the reason so many black people have had a problem divesting in support of Bill Cosby is because for many of us, that was the first time we'd ever seen anything like that. We hadn't imagined a universe in which that was possible. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, so I didn't see black doctors and lawyers, right? Especially not in my own family. And when he then did A Different World after that, like so many black people I know talk about how they went to black colleges because of that show. Like, media representation matters. What we see of ourselves tells us something about who we can be, right? And so that's the other thing we're saying, is that if y'all are saying that the things that tell us who we can be are always inferior to who you get to be, then it's not just about access or wanting to be in the cool kids club. You're literally saying that there's something inferior about us and the kinds of lives we represent, right?
That's institutional.
Yeah, that's institutional. It's institutional racism, it's not individual racism, but it is powered by individual racists in that case.
I just want to make a quick comment too, just to jump in there, because I think that was a great exchange, and you talked a lot about how white maleness is often neutral, right? And so I think about the critique of, well, we can all be offended at the kind of consumerist capitalism of the Oscars, and that's true, right? So it's a legit critique, but that, oh, we can all discredits, diminishes the representational argument that you're making, and that's kind of your point to say that neutrality argument doesn't quite work for some of us, right? Some of our identities actually have different offenses. There's things that are very personal to us that we don't want to put to the side.
That's right.
So, your hand was next. Can you come up? And then there was somebody over here too, I don't want to miss. So 1, 2, 3. Come on up.
Come on down.
Hi, my name is Elisa, and my question or my commentary is on Formation and the Super Bowl and her performance and how there was such a backlash towards her, and kind of what is your opinion that when, maybe it's not a black woman, but when this because I saw an image of, 3 images of the Confederate flag, and they were speaking on the fact that when a performance like that does happen, there's no backlash. But when Beyonce does a performance about, bringing on the history of the Black Panther Party and anti-police brutality, it's, according to this woman, and I won't say her name because I shot her out after she said that, it's pro beating police, and her husband was a drug dealer for 14 years. What is your opinion of, this woman said, you should see it. What is your opinion, Fox News. What is your kind of response to when people say that or bring on that subject?
Well, I mean, part of it is about, look, I'm really talking to myself so that I don't cuss. Black people don't have to prove that expressions of love for ourselves are not racist. White people do have to prove why flying the flag of a country that was invested in the slavery of black people isn't racist, right? Here's what I mean. The way that these arguments go, they're always designed to put black people on the defensive. Show that you're not racist. Show that this is not anti-white. I won't do it. I won't do it, right? I don't get into debates with people to try to prove that affirmations of black life and black identity are not racist, because white people never have the burden of proving that the clearly racist things that they do are not racist. And when they do, all they tell us is, it's not racist. I mean, it's, the content of it is racist. Slavery is racist. The desire to own black people is racist. So it's like if you broke it down into propositions, they would have to agree that it's all racist. But the thing that represents it is not racist, right? So I don't have those kind of conversations because they're really disingenuous, and they're meant to actually act as though these are, that it's plausible that the Black Panther Party is racist, right? Which is not true. Look, the Black Panther Party and the Black Lives Matter movement is anti-white supremacy. It is anti-white dominance, right? It is anti the cops killing black people, right? Those are the things it stands against. And the issue is that folks see every expression of pro-black identity as anti-white. But that is because they see any evaluation of black lives as a devaluing of white lives. And because they see it that way, then part of what they are asking us to do when we refuse to affirm black lives is to reaffirm white dominance, right? Because they are saying these things are unequal. They are literally saying this is zero sum. If we value you more, we value us less. And we're not interested in that. We want more value. So, like, they're not trying to hear us say, we don't want to value you less, we want to value us more so that we can be equal, right? They are literally here, what they understand is what is true. That they have created a world in which the valuation of white life is predicated on devaluing of everybody else's lives. They fundamentally get that even if they can't articulate it, right? And because of that, this is why they hear the threat in the valuing of other lives, because they assume that we would use the same kind of calculus to evaluate the value of life as white supremacy uses, right? And so because of that, when we say Black Lives Matter, inherently people hear, you're saying my life doesn't matter. No, that's how white supremacy works. White supremacy works by saying only white lives matter. Other people claiming that their lives have value is no commentary on your life, only insofar as your life does not prevent my life from being lived. I know I'm saying obvious shit to you, but it's not obvious to many white people.
I know, like, we're like vibing here.
Yeah, right. So that is the challenge, is that they deploy this sort of stuff to get you into these meaningless debates in which you must prove that the Black Panther Party and pro-Black expression is not racist. And I don't do that. I just tell people to go read more. And I also am really clear that they're not trying to be convinced. Right? In most cases, people are not trying to be convinced. And part of what I'm talking about in being disrespectful is exactly that moment. When you say, I wish I would explain this shit to you. I'm not going to explain to you why my life has value. I'm not going to waste my time doing it. Right? Because the way that liberal whiteness works, they're like, if you were less angry and you could just explain it to me in a more civil tone, then I really could hear you. If you're standing on my foot, I don't have to ask you nicely to get off my foot. Get the fuck off my foot. Right? But this is essentially what they're saying. I'm going to stand on your foot and then be like, I'll get off if you ask me nicely. I can't hear you unless you ask me nicely. But you can hear me if I bite you. See, so then that's, right? And see, and they assume, and they know that they're worthy of being body slammed, and then they say to you like, you're so violent. So you standing on my foot, like you encroaching on my material existence was not violence, right? And so my homegirl, Chrissy Dodson, who was this philosopher, she just says to me, like when I'm doing this stuff in my scholarship and I'm watching people like make arguments about why intersectionality no longer matters, she was like, you don't have to prove that intersectionality still matters. You have to tell them that they have to prove why thinking it doesn't matter is not a violent act. So we have to get Black politics off the defensive.
That's right.
Because we never win that way. Because every time we engage people in these conversations, it's like it gives legitimacy to their point of view. Like they're really saying some stuff that could be legit. Like it could be legit that the Black Panthers were racist. Only in a world where Black people controlled property, money, capital, the police, and could actually materially reshape white life. Like at most what you could prove is that the Black Panthers might have not liked white people very much, which is prejudice. But like Black Panthers not liking white folks very much does not materially reshape any white folks' conditions. It actually, like systematically, it does not. It's a misread of power. And I'm not saying that it's okay to just go around disliking white people. I am saying that it's probably okay to have a healthy suspicion of them, though. And white people don't like to hear that. Because they're like, I'm a good white person. I've never hurt any Black people. Why would you say that? Because a lot of people who look like you have hurt Black people, right? And just like when you hear me saying angry stuff, what you might be thinking is, oh shit, lots of Black people think like her. You automatically associate me with people who look like me, so why can't I associate you with the acts of people who look like you? Right? Because Black folks are forced to acknowledge that the things we say. I'm invited here for Black History Month to give y'all a Black perspective on some shit. That's why I'm here. Because I'm perceived as being representative of a perspective that you don't typically get. I'm not just here to represent Brittany Cooper. I am doing the work of Brittany Cooper. There are other Black scholars who would disagree with me, and some would disagree with me greatly. But I am here because of the presumption that I represent a perspective of a people. But white people ask to be evaluated individually all the time. And I won't concede that to them, right? Because then they don't ever feel any responsibility for the stuff their people do, right? Their folk are racist, and it's like, so I'm just saying to white people all the time, like, call your own people out. Like, I wouldn't have to spend my time calling out the Oscars if y'all would be like, we not coming to the Oscars, right? And so then it becomes easy to look at black folks and be like, y'all so mad, y'all so angry. Well, if you think it's an injustice too, then you're the one in the back room, you're the one in the decision-making capacity, then you say something to your folks. Maybe they'll hear it better from you than they'll hear it from me anyway, right? So yeah, so as a self-care act, I typically don't engage. If I'm forced to, then my tactic is typically to make white people feel uncomfortable about their own histories of racism, rather than them trying to make me feel uncomfortable about black folks fighting for freedom. I won't feel uncomfortable about that. That doesn't need to be defended. I'm not doing any of that. What you need to tell me is why we should feel safe. If we walk out of here today and we continue to believe the world is as you say it is, how will black people fare under those conditions? Well, typically we already know, because that's how we've been living. So you have to tell me why the status quo that you advocating is a better proposition than the change that we advocate for. And if you can't tell me that, then I'm with my people in the streets. That's it. Yeah.